car dealership, ignored the old man in work clothes until he paid cash for 3 vehicles. Act Y. The Premier Auto Gallery occupied 3 acres of prime real estate on the highway outside Richmond, Virginia, where gleaming rows of luxury vehicles sat under strings of flags that snapped in the autumn breeze. BMWs, Mercedes, Lexus, high-end trucks with price tags that started at $60,000 and climbed rapidly from there. The showroom was all glass and chrome, designed to make customers feel they were entering somewhere exclusive, somewhere that demanded a certain level of financial sophistication. Walter Kowalski pulled into the lot just after 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, driving a 1998 Ford F-150 with faded paint and a replaced tailgate that didn't quite match. The truck's engine ran smoothly. Walter maintained it obsessively, but aesthetically, it looked exactly like what it was. A work vehicle with 240,000 miles that had earned every scratch and dent. Walter himself looked like an extension of the truck. He was 78 years old, wearing Carhartt work pants stained with paint and oil, a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times, the pattern was fading, and work boots that were scuffed but clean. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by decades of outdoor work, and his white hair was cut short and practical. He moved with the careful economy of someone whose body had absorbed a lifetime of hard labor, but remained functional through sheer discipline. He parked in the visitor section and walked toward the showroom, carrying a worn leather folder under his arm. Through the glass, he could see salespeople in sharp suits moving among the vehicles, their postures confident, their smiles practiced. The showroom was climate-controlled comfort, soft lighting, leather furniture, a coffee station with expensive machinery, and new cars positioned like sculptures. Walter stood just inside the entrance, taking it in, remembering when buying a car meant haggling at a lot, filled with used vehicles and salesmen who actually worked for their commissions. 3 salespeople were visible. 2 were engaged with customers, a young couple looking at an SUV, an older man examining a luxury sedan. The 3rd salesperson, a man in his early 30s named Brandon Mitchell, was standing near the coffee station, scrolling through his phone. Brandon glanced up, saw Walter, and his eyes did a quick assessment. Old truck visible through the window, work clothes, general appearance suggesting someone who'd wandered in by mistake or was killing time while his vehicle was serviced somewhere nearby. Not a serious buyer, not worth interrupting phone time. Brandon went back to his scrolling. Walter waited. He was good at waiting, had learned patience in harder schools than car dealerships. After 3 minutes, when no one approached, he walked toward Brandon. "Excuse me, I'm interested in looking at some vehicles." Brandon looked up with barely concealed annoyance. "Sure, no problem. What are you looking for?" 3 trucks, full-size, 4-wheel drive, reliable, preferably with towing capacity. Brandon's eyebrows rose slightly. 3 trucks? Are you a fleet buyer? Because we have a commercial division that handles bulk purchases. Not a fleet, just 3 trucks. For your business? For people who need them. Brandon's expression suggested he thought Walter was either confused or wasting his time. Okay, well, 3 full-size trucks. We're looking at probably $180 to $220 for all 3, depending on models and options. Do you have financing pre-approved, or were you planning to apply here? Cash? I'm sorry? I'll be paying cash. Brandon smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he was humoring someone who didn't understand how expensive vehicles were. Sir, when you say cash, do you mean you have financing arranged through your bank or... I mean cash, currency. I'll need a cashier's check for the exact amount, but the funds are available immediately. The smile faltered. You're saying you want to pay for 3 trucks. We're talking potentially $200,000 in cash? That's correct. Brandon glanced toward his manager's office, clearly uncertain how to proceed. Okay, well, let me show you what we have. If you're serious about this, we should probably get a manager involved to discuss the details. I'm serious. They walked through the lot, Brandon pointing out various trucks with the mechanical enthusiasm of someone who didn't believe this was a real sale. Walter examined each vehicle carefully, not just kicking tires, but checking build quality, looking at engine specifications, testing door mechanisms and seat adjustments. This one, Walter said, stopping at a GMC Sierra. And that Ram over there, and the F-250 in the back row. Brandon pulled out his tablet, calculating. Okay, those 3 together come to $212,460 before taxes and fees. With everything, you're looking at about $228,000. That's acceptable. What do we need to do to complete the purchase? Sir, I have to be honest with you. This seems unusual. We don't typically have people walk in off the street wanting to pay cash for 3 high-end trucks. I'm going to need to bring my manager in, verify some things. No offense intended, but we have protocols for large transactions. No offense taken, get your manager. Brandon walked back to the showroom, and Walter could see him through the glass having an animated conversation with a man in his 50s wearing a tie and an expression of professional skepticism. The manager, his nameplate would later identify him as Gerald Hartman, looked out at Walter standing patiently among the trucks, clearly trying to reconcile the appearance with the claimed purchasing power. They emerged together, Gerald extending his hand with the careful courtesy of someone who'd learned not to judge too quickly but retain serious doubts. Mr. Kowalski, Walter Kowalski. Mr. Kowalski, I'm Gerald Hartman, General Manager. Brandon tells me you're interested in purchasing 3 vehicles with cash. That's certainly unusual, and I want to make sure we handle this properly. Can you tell me a little about the purchase? What these vehicles are for? They're for 3 families, people who need reliable transportation. Are you buying them as gifts? In a sense? Gerald's skepticism was visible but controlled. Mr. Kowalski, I need to be direct with you. A cash purchase of this size raises certain flags. We have obligations regarding money laundering laws, need to verify the source of funds, ensure everything is legitimate. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I need to understand the situation before we proceed. Walter nodded, opened his leather folder, and handed Gerald a single piece of paper. This is a letter from my bank, confirming available funds. You can call them to verify. The account number is there, along with the contact information for my banker, Patricia Morrison. She's expecting your call. Gerald examined the letter, his expression shifting as he read. The letterhead was from a major national bank, the language professional and specific, the stated available balance well over the amount in question. May I make this call? Please. Gerald walked back to his office, letter in hand, leaving Brandon standing with Walter in uncomfortable silence. Through the office window, they could see Gerald on the phone, his posture changing as the conversation progressed, from skeptical to surprised to something approaching respectful. Brandon cleared his throat. So, Mr. Kowalski, what kind of work do you do? Maintenance, repairs, whatever needs doing. That must be lucrative. It's honest. Gerald emerged from his office 15 minutes later, his entire demeanor transformed. Mr. Kowalski, I apologize for the delay. Your banker confirmed everything. She spoke very highly of you, actually. Said you've been a customer for 40 years. 42. She also mentioned that you've never financed anything, that you live modestly and save diligently. Gerald paused. She said you're a veteran. Yes? Which branch? Army, long time ago. Gerald's professionalism was now tinged with genuine respect. Thank you for your service. Now, let's talk about these trucks. You've selected 3 excellent vehicles, but I want to make sure they're exactly what you need. These are for families, you said? Yes, 3 families who lost someone. I want to make sure they have reliable transportation, something that won't break down, won't leave them stranded. Something shifted in Gerald's expression. Lost someone in service? Yes. The conversation had attracted attention. Other salespeople had noticed the extended consultation, the manager's involvement, the old man in work, clothes who was apparently a serious buyer. A small crowd was gathering at a discreet distance, pretending to work, but clearly watching. Mr. Kowalski, Gerald said quietly, I'd like to help make this happen in a way that honors what you're trying to do. Can we move to my office? I think we can work out some details that will make this more meaningful. Walter followed Gerald inside, leaving Brandon standing in the lot, trying to process what was happening. In the office, Gerald closed the door and gestured to a chair. Mr. Kowalski, I'm a veteran myself. Marines, 2 tours in Iraq. I know something about the kind of loss you're talking about. Can you tell me more about these 3 families? Walter was quiet for a moment, his hands folded in his lap. I served with their husbands, different times, different places. All 3 men died in service, 1 in Vietnam, 1 in the Gulf, 1 in Afghanistan. Their families, widows, children, some grandchildren now, they've struggled. I've stayed in touch over the years, helped where I could. These vehicles are part of that. You've been helping them for years? For decades in some cases. Sarah Johnson's husband died in '72. I was there when it happened. Promised him I'd look after his family if anything happened to him. Kept that promise. Linda Martinez's husband died in '91. Same promise, same follow-through. And Jessica Freeman's husband died in 2009. He was young enough to be my grandson, but we served together on a training mission, and I made the same promise. Gerald sat back, processing this. So, you've been supporting three families for decades? Not supporting, just helping. Making sure they had what they needed, staying connected, being present. The husbands couldn't be there, so I tried to be a small substitute. Not replacement, that's impossible, but presence. And now you're buying them trucks. Their vehicles are failing. Sarah's son is still driving the car she bought 20 years ago. Linda's taking buses to work. Jessica's using a vehicle that's more rust than metal. They need reliable transportation, but they can't afford it. I can, so I'm buying them trucks. This is going to cost you over $200,000. I know, I have it, I don't need it for anything else. This is what it should be used for. Gerald leaned forward. Mr. Kowalski, I want to do something. I'm going to sell you these trucks at cost. No markup, no profit for the dealership. We'll cover it as a veteran support program. That's going to save you probably $30,000. Walter looked at him steadily. That's generous, but not necessary. I can afford the full price. I know you can, but I also know what you're doing, and it deserves recognition. Please, let me do this. Walter nodded slowly. All right, thank you. Now, let's talk about the vehicles themselves. I want to make sure these families get exactly what they need. ACT2. By lunchtime, word had spread through the dealership. The old man in work clothes was buying 3 trucks, at cost, for widows of fallen soldiers. The atmosphere had shifted from dismissive to reverent, the sales staff gathering to hear details, several admitting they'd initially ignored Walter when he'd arrived. Brandon found Walter examining the trucks again, making notes on paperwork. Mr. Kowalski, I want to apologize. When you came in this morning, I made assumptions based on your appearance. That was wrong and unprofessional. You didn't know, Walter said simply. People make assumptions. It's human nature. Still, I should have treated you with respect, regardless of what I thought you could afford. You weren't rude, just not particularly helpful. There's a difference. Gerald had assembled the entire sales staff in the showroom. Everyone, I want you to meet Walter Kowalski. He's purchasing 3 vehicles today for families of fallen service members. This is what we should be in business for. Helping people, making a difference, being part of something larger than quarterly sales targets. He turned to Walter. Would you be willing to share a bit about the men you're honoring? I think the staff would appreciate understanding who these vehicles represent. Walter was uncomfortable with the attention, but he understood what Gerald was trying to do, create a teaching moment for his employees. All right. He stood before the group, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked among these polished professionals in their pressed suits and perfect hair. But his voice was steady when he spoke. The first man was Private First Class Anthony Johnson. We served together in Vietnam, same platoon, same area of operations. Tony was 19 years old, from Alabama, married his high school sweetheart right before deployment. We were on patrol in '72 when we got ambushed. Tony took rounds covering our withdrawal, died getting the rest of us to safety. Walter's voice remained level, factual, but something in his eyes showed the weight. Before he died, he asked me to tell his wife Sarah that he loved her, and to look after her if he didn't make it home, so I did. Went to see her when I got back, brought her Tony's letters and personal effects, and stayed in touch. 49 years now. The showroom was completely silent. The second man was Sergeant First Class Roberto Martinez. We served together in the Gulf War. Roberto was 32, from Texas, had 2 daughters. We were part of a unit doing forward reconnaissance. Iraqi forces hit us with artillery, and Roberto threw himself on a wounded soldier to shield him from shrapnel. Saved that soldier's life, lost his own. Roberto asked me to look after his wife Linda and the girls. Made me promise before he died, so I kept my word. Stayed in touch with Linda, watched the daughters grow up, helped where I could. 31 years. The third man was Staff Sergeant Marcus Freeman. I was doing contract training work in Afghanistan in 2009. I was 72, thought I was done with military service, but they needed someone with experience training local forces. Marcus was assigned to the unit I was training. He was 28 years old, married to Jessica, had a 3-year-old son. Walter's hands clenched slightly. Training exercise went wrong. Live ammunition that shouldn't have been present. Confusion about ranges. Marcus saw the danger before I did. Pushed me out of the line of fire. Took the rounds meant for me. Died saving a man 50 years older than him who should have known better. Someone in the listening crowd drew a sharp breath. Marcus didn't ask me to look after Jessica. Couldn't. Died too fast. But I made the promise anyway. To him, to myself, to whatever sense of honor I had left. Stayed with Jessica through the grief, the funeral, the years after. Helped with her son Darius as he grew up. 14 years now. Walter looked around at the faces watching him. These 3 men died because they were brave, because they put others before themselves, because they understood duty in ways that most people never have to. Their families carried that loss, carried the weight of their absence, and I promised to help them carry it. The trucks are just practical application of that promise. Their old vehicles are failing, and reliable transportation matters when you're raising children alone, or trying to get to work, or managing life without a partner. Brandon spoke up, his voice thick. That's incredible. But why work maintenance jobs? If you have this kind of money, because I needed to work, needed to stay busy, stay useful, stay connected to labor and purpose. The money wasn't the point. The work was. Walter paused. Also, I lived on military pay for 30 years, then modest pensions after that. The money I'm using today comes from living simply and investing carefully for 40 years. Every dollar I didn't spend on myself could go to the families. That was worth more than a nicer car or a bigger house. Gerald spoke into the silence. Mr. Kowalski, you've been living modestly for 4 decades to help these families? Not sacrificing, just choosing. I had enough. They needed more. The math was simple. An older salesman, maybe 55, with thinning hair and a kind face, stepped forward. Sir, my father was in Vietnam. He didn't make it back. I never got to know him, grew up without a father. If someone had done for my mother what you've done for these families... He couldn't finish, too choked with emotion. Walter nodded. I'm sorry for your loss. The men who didn't come back, they leave holes that never quite fill, but sometimes we can make the edges less sharp, the burden less heavy. The dealership's receptionist, a woman in her 40s named Carol, asked quietly, Did you have a family of your own? Wife? Children? No. There were women over the years, relationships that might have become something. But I'd made promises to 3 families, and keeping those promises took time, energy, attention. Didn't seem fair to split my focus when I'd committed to being present for others. Walter's expression was neutral, matter of fact. Some people have families. I had promises. Both are valid choices. But don't you regret it? Carol pressed. Spending your whole life caring for other people's families instead of building your own? Walter was quiet for a long moment. Regret is complicated. Do I wonder sometimes what my life would have looked like with a wife, children, grandchildren? Of course. But I also know that 3 families had someone present when they might have had no one. Sarah's son went to college because I helped with tuition. Linda's daughters had someone at their school events when their mother was working 2 jobs. Darius has a grandfather figure who shows up to his baseball games and helps with homework. Those aren't small things. Those are lives shaped, trajectories changed, so no, I don't regret it. I chose it. Every day for 49 years, I chose it again. That's not sacrifice. That's commitment. The atmosphere in the showroom had transformed completely. This wasn't a transaction anymore. It was something else, a glimpse into a life lived according to principles that most people only talk about, a demonstration of what keeping your word for half a century looked like. Gerald cleared his throat. Mr. Kowalski, let's finalize these vehicles, and I want to make one more offer. We're going to include extended warranties on all 3 trucks, full coverage, transferable to the families. We're also going to cover the first year of insurance. That's going to save another $15,000 or so in costs they'd otherwise have to absorb. Gerald, that's too generous. It's not generous. It's appropriate. You've given 49 years. We can give extended warranties. He turned to his staff. Everyone here is going to contribute to making sure these trucks are perfect. Detail them inside and out. Check every system. Make sure these families are getting vehicles that will last them decades. Understood? The staff nodded, several already moving toward the vehicles with purpose. Over the next 3 hours, the dealership transformed the 3 trucks. They were detailed meticulously. Systems triple-checked, extra touches added, emergency kits, first aid supplies, quality floor mats, phone mounts. The service department head, a gruff man named Tommy, who'd been working on cars for 30 years, personally inspected each vehicle and declared them sorted proper. Brandon worked with Walter on the paperwork, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by genuine humility. Mr. Kowalski, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. How do you do it? Carry this for so long. I mean, I get frustrated when customers are rude to me for a day. You've been keeping promises for decades. Doesn't the weight ever become too much? Walter looked at him directly. The weight is always there. Every holiday I think about the 3 men who aren't with their families. Every milestone, birthdays, graduations, weddings, I see what they're missing. That never gets lighter. But the alternative is abandoning the promises I made, letting those families face everything alone, allowing the men who died to be forgotten. That weight would be heavier. So you just endure? Not endure. Choose. Every day I choose to keep the promises. That's different from just enduring. It's active, intentional. It gives the weight purpose. As the sun began to set, the 3 trucks were ready, gleaming, perfectly prepared, each one representing years of sacrifice and commitment. Gerald had arranged for all 3 families to come to the dealership the next morning for the presentation, wanting to make the moment special, but Walter had one more request. I'd like to see each family separately if possible. These are private moments, and each family's story is their own, not a public ceremony. Gerald understood. Of course. We'll arrange it however you want. Walter walked among the 3 trucks one final time, running his hand over the metal, thinking about Tony and Roberto and Marcus, about the promises made and kept, about the weight of 49 years and whether it had been enough. Mr. Kowalski, Carol had approached quietly. I wanted to say something. My husband is deployed right now, overseas, dangerous area. I worry about him constantly. But knowing there are people like you, people who keep their promises even when it costs them everything, it helps. If something happened to him, if I became one of those widows, knowing that his brothers in arms might remember us, might help us, that matters more than you can know. Your husband will come home, Walter said, though he knew he couldn't promise that. But if he doesn't, someone will remember. Someone will help carry the weight. That's what we do. That's what military families deserve. Carol hugged him, unexpected and fierce, and Walter stood stiffly, uncomfortable with the display but understanding what she needed to express. As the dealership closed for the evening, Gerald walked Walter to his old F-150. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., we'll have the families here. And Walter, thank you for everything you've done, for what you're still doing. You've reminded all of us why we're supposed to be in business, to serve people, to make their lives better, to be part of something meaningful. Walter nodded, climbed into his truck, and drove away into the evening. Behind him, the 3 new trucks sat under the lights, waiting for their new owners, carrying the weight of 3 lives lived and 3 promises kept. ACT3. The Cost. Walter returned to his small apartment, a 1-bedroom in a modest complex, furnished simply with military precision. The walls held photographs, young soldiers in various uniforms from various decades, families at different stages of growth, children becoming adults, grandchildren arriving. 3 separate family lineages documented across half a century. He made simple dinner, grilled chicken, vegetables, nothing fancy, and sat at his small table eating alone, as he'd eaten alone for decades. The apartment was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic sounds. Quiet had been his companion for so long that it felt natural now. But on nights like this, when he'd taken significant action, when promises were being fulfilled in visible ways, the quiet pressed heavier. His phone rang. Sarah Johnson's son, Michael, 52 years old now, with his own children. Walter, Mom told me about tomorrow, about the truck. I wanted to call you before we see it. Michael, you didn't have to do this. You've done so much already. Your father asked me to look after your family. This is part of that. It's been 49 years, Walter. Most people would have moved on decades ago. Sent a Christmas card maybe, but moved on. You've been present for every birthday, every graduation, every crisis. You've been a father when I couldn't have my real one. Walter's grip tightened on the phone. I'm not your father, Michael. Tony was your father. I'm just keeping a promise. You're more than that. You're family. And this truck, it's not just transportation. It's proof that my father mattered, that his sacrifice wasn't forgotten, that someone cared enough to keep caring for 5 decades. Michael's voice cracked. How do I thank you for that? You don't. You just live a good life, raise your children well, and maybe keep your own promises when they come. That's thanks enough. After Michael hung up, Walter sat with the phone in his hand, staring at the photographs on his wall. Tony, young and smiling, in uniform, with Sarah on their wedding day. Roberto with his 2 daughters, teaching them to fish. Marcus holding infant Darius, pride and love radiating from his face. 3 men who'd lived, loved, served, and died. 3 men whose families had continued on without them, carrying grief and loss that never fully healed. 3 men who'd trusted Walter to remember, to help, to be present when they couldn't be. The weight of that trust, it was crushing some nights. Walter thought about the life he hadn't lived, the wife he'd never married because dating seemed impossible when you had 3 families needing you, the children he'd never had because how could you divide attention between your own kids and the kids of fallen brothers? The career he'd never pursued, because keeping promises required flexibility, required being able to drop everything when Sarah needed help moving, or Linda's daughter needed a ride to school, or Jessica's son needed someone at his baseball game. All the roads not taken, all the possibilities abandoned in service of promises made in trenches and deserts and training grounds to dying men who'd trusted him with their final thoughts. Was it worth it? Walter looked at the photographs again. Michael, who'd graduated college, become an engineer, raised 3 children who called Walter Uncle Walter with genuine affection. Linda's daughters, both successful professionals, both crediting Walter's presence and support as crucial to their development. Darius, now 18, heading to college on a scholarship, talking about joining the military himself to honor his father's legacy. 3 families who'd thrived despite devastating loss. 3 groups of children and grandchildren who'd grown up knowing their fathers had been heroes, knowing that their sacrifice had mattered enough that a man had dedicated his life to proving it. Was it worth it? Walter's eyes found a different photograph. Himself at 40, still relatively young, standing with Sarah and young Michael at a park. He looked tired in that photo, carrying weight that was already accumulating. But there was something in his expression, purpose, commitment. The certainty that came from knowing what you were doing mattered. Some nights, he missed that certainty. Some nights, the weight felt too heavy, the sacrifice too great, the loneliness too profound. But other nights, like tonight, with 3 trucks waiting to change 3 families' lives, the certainty returned. Yes, it had been worth it. His phone rang again. Jessica this time, Marcus's widow. Walter, I don't know what to say. I've been crying since Gerald called to tell me about tomorrow. You've given us so much over the years, and now this. It's too much. It's not too much. It's what Marcus would have wanted. Marcus died saving you, Jessica said quietly. He was 28 years old, had his whole life ahead of him, and he died protecting a man who'd already lived a full life. Sometimes I'm angry about that. Sometimes I think it should have been reversed. You should have died and he should have lived. Walter closed his eyes. I think that every day. But then, I see what you've done with the years Marcus gave you. How you've been there for Darius. How you've helped us survive and then thrive. How you've honored Marcus's sacrifice by living a life dedicated to keeping promises. And I realize that maybe Marcus's death wasn't meaningless if it allowed you to do all this good. That's generous of you. It's true. Walter, you gave up everything to take care of us and the other families. Why? What drives someone to sacrifice their entire life for people you weren't even related to? Walter was quiet for a long time. I made promises. That's reason enough. But also, I've killed people, Jessica. In combat, doing my job, legal and necessary killing, but killing nonetheless. I've taken lives. The least I could do with the rest of my life was preserve lives, protect families, help people thrive instead of just survive. It's not penance exactly, but it's balance. How many people did you kill? I don't know exact numbers. Combat doesn't keep precise tallies, but enough that it all matters. Enough that I carry their faces too, along with the faces of the brothers I couldn't save. It's all weight, Jessica, all of it. And helping us makes it lighter? It gives it purpose, makes the survival mean something. If I lived through Vietnam and the Gulf and all the other places just to come home and live a comfortable retirement, what would that say about the men who didn't make it? But if I lived so I could keep promises, so I could help families, so I could make their sacrifice matter by proving that their loved ones are never forgotten, then maybe surviving was worthwhile. Jessica was crying softly. Darius wants to join the army. He's been talking about it for months. I'm terrified, Walter. Terrified I'll lose him like I lost Marcus. But he's so determined, says he wants to serve like his father did. What do you want me to tell him? I don't know. Part of me wants you to talk him out of it. But part of me is proud, knows that Marcus would be proud. I'm so confused. I'll talk to him, not to dissuade or encourage, just to make sure he understands what he's choosing. Military service is honorable, but it needs to be chosen for the right reasons with full understanding of the costs. Thank you for everything. Tomorrow, when we get the truck, when I see you, I'm going to hug you and cry and make a scene. Just warning you. Walter smiled slightly. I'll endure it. After hanging up, Walter sat in the silence of his apartment, thinking about Darius, a young man he'd helped raise, watched grow from toddler to teenager to adult, a young man who called him Grandpa Walter and asked advice about school and jobs and life, a young man who'd never known his father but understood sacrifice because Walter had made sure he understood. Now Darius wanted to serve, wanted to follow in his father's footsteps, wanted to be part of something larger than himself. And if he served, there was always the possibility that he'd become another photograph on someone's wall, another promise made to a dying soldier, another family needing decades of support, the cycle continuing, the weight passing forward to the next generation. Walter thought about talking Darius out of it, using his influence to guide the young man towards safer paths. But that would be dishonest, would diminish Marcus's sacrifice, would suggest that military service wasn't worthy of respect and honor. So, instead, Walter would talk to Darius honestly, about the pride of service and the cost, about brotherhood and loss, about promises made and the weight of keeping them. And then Darius would choose, and Walter would respect that choice, and the cycle would continue as it always had, because that's what promises meant. That's what honoring the fallen required. Not just helping for a year or a decade, but staying present across generations, accepting that the wait never truly ended. It just transformed and continued. Walter looked at his reflection in the darkened window, austin far big bars and old man, 78 years old, carrying promises made when he was young and strong and certain. He looked tired. He was tired, but he'd be at the dealership tomorrow morning, watching 3 families receive 3 trucks, and the weight would feel lighter for a moment. Just a moment, but moments accumulated over decades, and that accumulation was what you built a life on. ACT's or. The next morning, Premier Auto Gallery opened early for the presentations. Gerald had arranged for each family to come at separate times, 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and 1 p.m., giving each their private moment with Walter and the vehicle that represented decades of kept promises. Sarah Johnson arrived first, driven by her son, Michael. She was 73 now, white-haired and frail, but with sharp eyes that still held the beautiful woman Tony had fallen in love with in 1970. She walked slowly, Michael supporting her elbow, and when she saw Walter standing next to the GMC Sierra, she stopped and put her hand to her mouth. Walter. Sarah. They embraced carefully, 2 old people who'd known each other for 49 years, who'd shared grief and triumph and countless ordinary moments that had built a relationship deeper than romance, different than family, something unique to their specific circumstances. You didn't have to do this, Sarah said, touching the truck's hood like it might disappear. Tony asked me to take care of you. This is part of that. Tony died in 1972. It's been 49 years, Walter. Most people would have forgotten us decades ago. I didn't forget. Couldn't forget. Tony died covering our withdrawal. Died so 6 of us could live. The least I could do was make sure his family thrived. Michael walked around the truck, examining it with the appreciation of someone who understood vehicles. This is top of the line, Walter. This isn't just reliable transportation. This is luxury. Your mother deserves luxury. She's driven the same car for 20 years, kept it running through pure determination and frequent repair. She deserves something that won't break down, won't leave her stranded, will still be running when... Walter paused, the thought unfinished but clear. When I'm gone, Sarah finished for him. It's all right, Walter. I'm 73. I know time is limited, but this truck will serve Michael's family after me. That's good. That's right. Gerald appeared with paperwork and keys, his professional demeanor softened by genuine emotion. Mrs. Johnson, the truck is registered in your name, insurance is covered for the first year, and we've included an extended warranty that's fully transferable. If you need anything, any service, any support, you call me directly. He handed her his personal card. Sarah took the keys with shaking hands. I don't know how to thank you, any of you. Thank Tony, Walter said quietly. He's the reason this happened. His sacrifice, his request, his faith that I'd keep my word. This is all Tony. They took photos. Sarah in the driver's seat, Michael and his family gathered around, Walter standing slightly apart, but included. Gerald's staff watched from the showroom, several wiping eyes, moved by witnessing something they couldn't quite articulate but recognized as significant. As Sarah and Michael prepared to leave, Sarah took Walter's hand. You gave up having your own family to take care of mine. That's a sacrifice I can never repay. I didn't give up anything I needed. I made choices. They were the right choices for me. Still, you're family to us, Walter. Not biological, not legal, but family in every way that matters. Thank you for 49 years of showing up. Thank you for making Tony's death mean something by proving his family was worth protecting. Thank you for everything. Walter watched them drive away in the new truck, Sarah at the wheel despite her age, determined to experience this gift immediately. Then he returned to the showroom to wait for the second family. Linda Martinez arrived at 11 with her 2 daughters, Anna, 42, and Rosa, 39, and 4 grandchildren. Linda was 70, still working as a hospital administrator despite being eligible for retirement, unable to stop because stopping meant confronting the empty house and the absence that 31 years hadn't filled. The Ram 1500 waiting for her was silver, practical, equipped for someone who needed dependable transportation without flash or show. Linda saw it and went very still. Walter, no. Linda, yes. You've done too much. Too much money, too much time, too much of your life given to us. I can't accept this. Roberto asked me to take care of you and the girls. This is what taking care looks like now. Anna and Rosa were crying already, remembering the man who'd been present at every school event, every birthday, every milestone of their lives, despite having no biological obligation to be there. The man who'd filled the space their father left, not as replacement, but as remembrance. How much did this cost? Linda demanded, her voice sharp with the protective fierceness that had sustained her through 3 decades of single motherhood. It doesn't matter. It matters to me. You've lived in that tiny apartment for 40 years, so you'd have money to help us. You've worked maintenance jobs despite having the skills and experience for better positions because it gave you flexibility to be available when we needed you. You've given everything, Walter. When does it end? When I don't keep my promises. When Roberto's sacrifice is forgotten. When you and the girls struggle alone because I decided my comfort was more important than his dying request. Walter's voice was gentle but firm. It ends when I die, Linda, not before. That's what promises mean. She broke then, 42 years of grief and gratitude and guilt pouring out in tears that her daughters joined. Walter stood stiffly, uncomfortable with the emotional display, but understanding it. It was necessary that sometimes weight needed to be expressed before it could be carried forward. Gerald and his staff had assembled in the showroom again, watching through the glass as 3 generations of the Martinez family embraced the man who'd refused to let them be forgotten. Brandon, the salesman who'd initially dismissed Walter, was openly crying. When Linda finally composed herself, she took the keys and walked around the truck, touching it like she was confirming it was real. Roberto would have loved this truck, big, strong, reliable, just like him. He was all of those things. And this truck represents his values: dependability, strength, presence. It's a fitting tribute. Rosa, the younger daughter, approached Walter. I'm naming my next baby after you, boy or girl, middle name Walter, because you've been our grandfather, our support, our proof that good people exist. That deserves to be remembered in our family. Walter was overwhelmed, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, I'm honored. Thank you. They took more photos, more memories, more documentation of this moment when promises made in 1991 were being fulfilled in 2024 with a vehicle that would serve the family for years to come. Then Linda drove away, her daughters and grandchildren following in their own vehicles, a caravan carrying forward the legacy of a man who died protecting his brothers. Walter ate lunch alone in his old F-150, gathering himself for the final presentation. 3 families, 3 trucks, 3 promises coming to culmination in a single day. The weight was heavy, but bearable, because it had purpose. Jessica Freeman arrived at 1 p.m. with Darius, now 18 and about to leave for college. Jessica was 46, still carrying the beauty that had captured Marcus's heart, but marked by years of grief and determination. Darius was tall and strong, the image of his father at the same age, and seeing him made Walter's chest tight with memory and pride and fear. The F-250 waiting for them was white and powerful, equipped for towing and heavy work. A truck that could handle anything life threw at it. Jessica saw it and stopped, hand over her mouth, trying to process what Walter had done. For us? For you and Darius. Reliable transportation for his college years and beyond. Darius walked around the truck, examining it with the critical eye of a young man who appreciated vehicles but didn't fully understand the weight they could carry. This is incredible, Grandpa Walter. This must have cost. It doesn't matter what it cost. What matters is you and your mother having reliable transportation. What matters is honoring your father's sacrifice by making sure his family thrives. Jessica turned to Walter, her eyes searching his face. You didn't have to do this. Marcus would understand if you'd moved on, built your own life, found your own happiness. He wouldn't want you to sacrifice everything for us. Marcus died saving me. The least I can do is make sure his sacrifice meant something. It meant you survived. That's enough. It's not enough, Walter said quietly. Marcus was 28. He had decades ahead of him. Should have watched Darius grow up, should have had more children, should have had a full life. Instead, he died protecting a 72-year-old man who'd already lived most of his life. That debt can never be repaid, but I can spend my remaining years trying to honor it. Darius spoke up, his voice careful. Grandpa Walter, Mom told me you want to talk to me about joining the Army. I do. Not here, not now, but soon, yes. Because you don't want me to serve? Because I want you to serve for the right reasons with full understanding of what it costs. Your father was a hero, Darius. But heroism comes with a price, and sometimes that price is paid by the people left behind. You need to understand that before you sign papers. I understand. I've lived it. But I still want to serve. Then we'll talk about how to serve well, how to honor your father's legacy, how to come home when your service is done. Walter paused. And we'll talk about promises, and what it means to keep them, and why some weights are worth carrying. Gerald presented the keys and paperwork, his usual professional spiel, long abandoned in favor of simple human connection. Mrs. Freeman, this truck represents more than transportation. It represents a man's commitment to his word across 15 years. It's rare to see that kind of integrity. Treasure it. As they prepared to leave, Darius hugged Walter, the first time he'd initiated physical contact in years. Thank you, not just for the truck, but for being my grandfather when I couldn't have my father, for showing me what it means to keep promises, for teaching me about honor and sacrifice and commitment. You've been more than a stand-in, more than a substitute. You've been exactly what I needed. Walter held him, this young man who'd grown up under his watchful care, who was about to step into his own journey, who carried his father's legacy forward into a new generation. Your father would be proud of you, the man you've become, the choices you're making. He'd be so proud. They drove away, and Walter stood alone in the empty lot, the weight of the day settling over him. 3 trucks delivered, 3 promises fulfilled in tangible form. Decades of commitment crystallized into vehicles that would serve families for years to come. Brandon approached quietly. Mr. Kowalski, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Was it worth it? Everything you gave up, everything you sacrificed, looking back, was it worth it? Walter thought about the question seriously, looking out at where the 3 families had driven away in their new trucks. I think about that often, about the wife I never married, the children I never had, the career I never pursued, about all the roads not taken because I chose a different path. And yes, it was worth it. Those 3. Men died trusting me to remember their families. 3 widows raised children knowing someone would help carry the burden. 3 groups of children grew up understanding that their father's sacrifices mattered enough, that someone dedicated his life to proving it. That's worth a few roads not taken. You're a better man than most. No, just a man who kept his promises. That's not exceptional. That's basic human decency. But somehow, we've forgotten that decency is supposed to be the baseline, not the achievement. Closing. Walter Kowalski continued living in his small apartment, working maintenance jobs, maintaining the same modest lifestyle that had defined his adult years. But something had shifted after the trucks were delivered, a sense of completion, of promises kept fully rather than just continuously. The 3 families drove their new vehicles with pride and gratitude, but more importantly, with understanding of what they represented. Sarah Johnson's family used the GMC for family trips, the grandchildren learning to drive in it, creating memories with the vehicle that symbolized their grandfather Tony's sacrifice and Walter's commitment. Linda Martinez finally retired, using the Ram to volunteer for a veterans support organization, transporting elderly veterans to appointments and events. She told everyone who asked about the truck's story, spreading the narrative of Roberto's sacrifice and Walter's decades of devotion. Jessica Freeman and Darius used the F-250 to help other military families, hauling furniture for relocating soldiers, towing trailers for veterans organizations, putting the vehicle's capability in service of the community their family was part of. Darius went to college with a full scholarship, but deferred his military plans for 2 years at Walter's suggestion. Get your education first, then serve if you still feel called. The dealership changed too. Gerald implemented a veteran support program, selling vehicles at cost to qualifying military families, citing Walter's example as inspiration. Brandon, the salesman who'd initially dismissed Walter, started volunteering at a veteran's home, uncomfortable with his previous prejudices and determined to do better. Carol, the receptionist whose husband was deployed, sent Walter regular updates. Her husband came home safe 6 months after their conversation, and when he did, Carol brought him to meet Walter, wanting him to understand that men like Walter existed, that promises were still kept, even in an era when commitment seemed increasingly rare. The story spread through military networks. An old veteran who'd kept promises to 3 families for decades, who'd given up personal comfort and conventional success to honor dying men's final requests. Some called it noble. Others called it obsessive. Walter called it simple. You make a promise, you keep it. The rest is just details. At 79, Walter's body started showing the accumulated wear of a hard life. His back ached from decades of maintenance work. His hands showed arthritis from old injuries. His breathing came harder after a lifetime of stress and sacrifice. But his mind remained sharp, his commitment unwavering, his presence in the 3 families' lives consistent. Sarah Johnson died peacefully at 76, 3 years after receiving her truck. Walter was with her at the end, holding her hand, listening as she talked about Tony and their brief marriage and the life she'd built after his death. "Thank you for keeping your promise," she whispered in her final hours. "Thank you for making sure we were never forgotten." Walter promised to continue supporting her son, Michael, and his family, extending the commitment into another generation. Linda Martinez's daughters, Anna and Rosa, started their own tradition. Every year on Roberto's death anniversary, they gathered with Walter at the cemetery, sharing stories and ensuring their own children understood the grandfather they'd never met and the man who'd honored him for 3 decades. The tradition would continue long after Walter was gone, they assured him, passing the story forward to children and grandchildren who would carry the memory. Jessica Freeman remarried, a good man, a veteran himself, someone who understood sacrifice and respected Walter's role in her family. The wedding was small, and Walter stood as Jessica's family, walking her down the aisle, symbolizing the connection that had sustained her through 15 years of widowhood. Darius served as best man, and in his toast, he spoke about 2 fathers, the biological one who'd died protecting others, and the adoptive grandfather who'd lived protecting his father's legacy. Darius did eventually join the Army after college, following his father's path with Walter's cautious blessing. Serve honorably, come home safe, and remember that your life isn't just yours. It belongs to everyone who loves you and everyone who might need you, Walter told him before he left. Darius promised, and Walter added another name to the list of people he prayed for daily. Walter Kowalski lived to 83, his body finally giving out after 8 decades of hard use and harder promises. He died in his sleep, quietly, without drama or fanfare, the way he'd lived most of his life. His small apartment was nearly empty of possessions, his bank account depleted from decades of helping others, his personal effects minimal. But his funeral was packed. 3 families came in full force. Sarah's descendants, Linda's extended family, Jessica and Darius, and the life they'd built. Military veterans from multiple generations, people Walter had served with, or trained, or simply helped over the years. The dealership staff who'd witnessed his truck purchase and been changed by it. Strangers who'd heard the story and wanted to pay respects. Michael Johnson gave the eulogy, speaking about a man who'd kept a promise for 52 years. "My father died in 1972, and I was 3 years old. I have almost no memories of him, but I grew up knowing exactly who he was, what he stood for, what he sacrificed. I knew because Walter Kowalski spent his entire adult life making sure I knew, making sure our family understood that my father's death meant something, that his sacrifice mattered, that we were worth protecting. Walter could have lived for himself, could have married, had children, pursued career success, enjoyed retirement. Instead, he chose to live for others, for 3 families of fallen soldiers who might otherwise have been forgotten. That choice defined him. It was simultaneously the most selfless and most purposeful life I've ever witnessed. We're here today not to mourn Walter's death, but to honor his life, to say that promises can be kept, that sacrifice can be honored, that commitment across decades is possible. Walter proved it. He lived it. And now it's our responsibility to carry forward that legacy, to keep our own promises, to honor our own commitments, to remember that how we live matters more than how long we live. At the reception, the 3 families met properly for the first time, connected only by Walter's devotion, by 3 separate promises that had braided their lives together without their full awareness. They shared stories, compared experiences, laughed about Walter's stubbornness, and cried about his generosity. They established a scholarship fund in Walter's name for children of fallen service members, emphasizing not just academic achievement, but character, commitment, and understanding of sacrifice. The 3 trucks were donated to the fund's administration after their families had used them fully, sold to establish the endowment, continuing Walter's legacy of supporting military families. Linda's daughter, Rosa, named her next child, Walter, as promised. Jessica and her husband named their first child together, a son, after Marcus and Walter both. Michael's grandchildren grew up hearing stories about great-uncle Walter, who wasn't related by blood, but was family in every way that mattered. The dealership established an annual award, the Walter Kowalski Memorial Service Award, given to the employee who best exemplified dedication to customers beyond sales metrics, who understood that business could be service, that transactions could be relationships, that profit wasn't incompatible with principles. Brandon, the salesman who'd initially dismissed Walter, eventually became general manager. He never forgot the lesson about assumptions and appearances, about judging slowly and respecting universally. He told Walter's story to every new employee, making it part of the dealership's culture, ensuring that the old man in work clothes who changed lives would continue influencing how they conducted business. Years later, Darius, now a veteran himself, home from service, working as a counselor for transitioning soldiers, was asked to speak at a veterans event. He talked about his father Marcus, who died saving Walter, about Walter who'd spent 15 years being Darius's grandfather, about promises kept across generations, about weight carried willingly, about living in service to others. "My father died when I was 3, Darius said. "I have no memories of him, but I know exactly who he was because Walter Kowalski made sure I knew. Every story, every principle, every value my father held. Walter preserved them, passed them forward, ensured they lived beyond my father's death." Walter gave up everything to keep a promise to a dying soldier. He had no children, but he raised 3 families worth of children. He had no conventional success, but he succeeded in the most important way possible. He kept his word, for decades, without wavering, without complaint, because that's what honor looked like to him. We live in a time when promises are easily broken, when commitment is conditional, when sacrifice is considered foolish rather than noble. Walter's life stands as counterpoint to all that. He proved that keeping your word matters, that some things are worth sacrificing for, that honor isn't an outdated concept, but a timeless principle. So when you leave here tonight, remember Walter Kowalski. Remember that promises should be kept, that service to others is the highest calling, that how you live matters more than what you accumulate. Remember that 3 families thrived because one man refused to forget. And ask yourself, what promises are you keeping? What legacy are you building? What will people say about you when you're gone? The audience rose in standing ovation. Veterans and civilians, young and old, united in recognition that they'd witnessed something rare, a life lived with absolute commitment to principles that transcended self-interest. Later, Darius visited Walter's grave, a simple military headstone in a veteran's cemetery, marked only with name, rank, dates, and service. Beside it were 3 other stones: Tony Johnson, Roberto Martinez, Marcus Freeman. The 4 soldiers resting together, their brotherhood maintained in death as it had been in life. Darius placed flowers on all 4 graves, then stood at attention, saluting the men who'd shaped his life, the father who'd died protecting someone else's father, and the guardian who'd spent decades proving that protection mattered. "Thank you," Darius said quietly, "for everything. For the sacrifices, the commitment, the love that looked like duty, but was so much more. Thank you for teaching me what honor means, what promises cost, what legacy really is. I'll carry it forward. We all will." The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying the promise forward, ensuring that 4 names, Tony, Roberto, Marcus, Walter, would continue echoing through generations, teaching about sacrifice and service and the quiet nobility of keeping your word even when no one's watching. 3 trucks, 3 families, 3 promises kept across decades. 1 life, lived in service to others, transformed from individual sacrifice into collective legacy. 1 man who'd chosen commitment over comfort and, in doing so, proved that how we live matters, that promises can be kept, that honor still exists in a world that increasingly doubts it. That was Walter Kowalski's legacy. Not wealth or fame or conventional success, but something far more valuable. Proof that keeping your word across a lifetime is possible, that sacrifice and service to others creates meaning that transcends individual existence, that some promises are worth keeping, regardless of cost. The 3 families continue forward, carrying that legacy, teaching their children and grandchildren about the old man in work clothes who'd walked into a car dealership and, in paying cash for 3 vehicles, had revealed a life lived with purpose and principle, an unwavering commitment to promises made to dying soldiers. And in that revelation, in that moment of understanding what keeping promises really means, they'd all been changed, reminded that the best lives aren't measured in accumulation, but in distribution, not in what we take, but in what we give, not in comfort achieved, but in commitments honored. Walter Kowalski, 78 to 83, work clothes and calloused hands, 3 trucks and 3 families and 52 years of promises kept. That was enough. More than enough. Everything. End for all who keep their promises and all who honor the fallen through service to their families.